Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, what's going on today? How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. This is the first time I'm seeing you in 2021.
That's right. Obviously, our last episode, which was released on January 1st, little behind the scenes dirt, we did not record it on January 1st. So
No,
this
that was
really
not live. That was
that
not
was
a
not
live episode.
no. So yeah, obviously, Caroline, I said it last episode, but Happy New Year to you once again. Hope you had well, it's funny because I was going to say, hope you had a great New Year. I think kind of we're all in that stage right now where we like to say it to everybody, but I feel kind of guilty almost saying it because everybody was like stuck at home and everything. So it was different, but it was good to get rid of 2020, wasn't it?
It was, and I think, I've seen a lot about people determining what energy they wanted to bring into 2021, and I think that the focus is really what's going to help us get maybe to a different place in 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Caroline, I have to ask you because I guess listeners, if you probably won't make sense if you didn't listen to our last episode, this part, but Caroline, I have to ask because we were talking about New Year's resolutions on the previous episode. Are you drinking more water?
I definitely am. I've got my water right here.
Nice.
I'm holding it up so that Bryce can see it through our camera. But I am, and you know what? I actually think I was drinking more because that question was not in our episode script. But I was like, I think he's going to ask. I think he's going to remember and follow up on this. And I want to be able to say I've been drinking my water and staying hydrated. So that accountability is what you need to do.
Yeah, as a coworker and co-host, I wanted to just follow up and make sure that you're drinking water. I myself am also drinking more water as well, but not nearly getting enough exercise. But that's a story for another day.
Well, there's still a lot of 2021 left to work on that. We can just maybe focus on hydration to start with.
That's right. Today's episode, though, is not about hydration.
No.
That would not make for a very good episode. But today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Obviously, everybody's kind of still in lockdown and they're looking for different stuff to watch. And one of those places that everybody seems to turn to is Netflix. Obviously, they have a great selection, but here's the crazy part. Netflix doesn't carry absolutely everything. So there was some talk, I think it was last week maybe, that this is just for people in the US, it turned out that The Office was disappearing from the US Netflix and everybody was just going nuts. So today we thought, you know what, this is going to be fun. We're going to share our picks for some of the best titles that you can actually borrow or even stream from us here at EPL that you can't find on Netflix or some other major streaming services. Caroline, I assume you've got a pretty big list ready to go here today?
I do. I have my notes. I've scribbled all over them. I've got some titles that I'm really excited to talk about. And from a librarian point of view, this is a really interesting topic because you mentioned the agitation people were feeling about The Office and it disappearing from streaming. And when it turned out only in the United States, it's still available.
Sorry, US listeners.
Yeah, sorry about that. But this idea of like ownership, of owning physical material, if you own The Office on DVD, you own that. You get to keep it. And if it is acquired by something like Peacock or it changes where it's available, they don't come to your house and take it away. But when we have like this more ephemeral media, ideas of ownership are very different. And, when you think about like a library's collection and what it includes, there are a lot of things that we're going to talk about today that they're on our streaming as of right now. If you're listening to this way into the future, maybe give it a shot. And if not, we can help you find some other things.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are listening to this episode like a year, like in 2022 or even later on, I
Yeah.
apologize. Some of these titles might not be available, but if you're listening here within, obviously the first few months of this episode's release, yeah, all these episodes or all these titles should be available for you. I've got also some recommendations today for stuff that's on DVD or Blu-ray as well that aren't necessarily streaming. It's funny, Caroline, I should take a picture and show you. I'm a big fan of like owning physical media. I'm one of those weird people. I use my DVD/Blu-ray player all the time. So when that talk of The Office came up about, it disappearing forever, I bought the whole series through iTunes actually it was like $30. So I'm like, okay, I'm set now. And this was before I found out that Canadian Netflix is still going to be carrying it. So I felt a little ripped off, but at the same time, I'm like, you know what? I've got it now. It will disappear from there eventually one day, and I'm all set to watch the fine folks at Dunder Mifflin whenever I want to.
It's stockpiled. You've got it
Yeah.
set there for an emergency office situation.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm all set and ready to go. So yeah, obviously that's what we're going to be talking about today. Caroline and I each have our picks for our favorite things that aren't currently available on Netflix and streaming. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody about an upcoming event that we've got going on here at the library. It's been, Caroline, over a year since we've had one of these. So you're invited to join us for our first virtual Forward Thinking Speaker Series event on Thursday, February the 18th. Urshad Manji will be providing guidance to build our moral courage muscles during these uncertain times. Backed by scientific research and driven by the need for solutions, Manji offers the game-changing insight: only by turning disagreement into engagement will any of us cut through the noise and be heard. Urshad Manji is the author of Don't Label Me, an incredible conversation for divided times, and is the founder of the Moral Courage College, which teaches people how to do the right thing in the face of fear. We hope you'll join us for our first speaker series event in over a year. This event is presented in partnership with the Peter Lougheed Leadership College. Tickets to this event, here's the best part, they're free and they're available right now on eventbrite.ca. We're going to be chatting a little bit more about Urshad later on in the episode. But yeah, this has been a long road to get here, to get to our next Forward Thinking Speaker Series event. Personally, I want to thank we have our season pass holders who have been very patient with us since March, when we had to kind of postpone Tanya Talaga and Monica Lewinsky and all these other great speakers that we were supposed to bring you last year. It's been quite a bit of work behind the scenes for our team to try and get everybody rebooked. And we're really excited to have Urshad as our first virtual event. And I think this is going to be really good.
I'm really excited about it.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into our Overdue Finds picks. Caroline, what have you been enjoying lately?
Because we're going to be talking a lot about movies and TV later on, I thought I would choose a book this week. So I chose a book called My Big Shouting Day by Rebecca Patterson. And this is a picture book that I think can speak to a lot of people, but it's about a little girl who wakes up and immediately sees that her little brother is licking her stuff. So she has to shout at him, "Stop licking my stuff." And then she goes down to breakfast and it's an egg, and she doesn't want to eat a slimy, gross egg. So she has to shout, "I don't want this." And her day just gets worse from there. Her tights are itchy. Ballet is scratchy. Bedtime is for babies. Just the whole day goes right off the rails for her. But then, and a little bit of a spoiler alert. At the end of the day, she says to her mom that she's had a really big shouting day and she's sorry that she shouted so much. And the mom says, maybe tomorrow will be better. And, I like that message of, you might be in something, you might be in the middle of experiencing a lot of emotions at one time, but if you just kind of keep going, you can turn your day around, or maybe wake up the next day and have a bit of a different attitude about things. So it's called My Big Shouting Day by Rebecca Patterson. It's a few years old. It came out, I think, in 2012, but we've got some copies at the library. And like I said, it's aimed at kids, but I think there's a message in there for everyone.
That's what I was about to say. It sounds like it's fun. It's funny because, hearing on this show a few times about different picture books for kids and everything, and some of those lessons, just tomorrow's a new day. Like we all have bad days. Let's take a deep breath, and tomorrow hopefully will be better. And it's such a good message to have during these times anyway. So it's funny because somebody who doesn't have kids, I don't work in a branch like you do, so I'm not around these books as much. So I imagine there's lots of picture books like that sometimes us adults, it wouldn't hurt us to pick those up and take things in perspective anyway.
Yeah, and there's I think a little bit of like a cathartic feeling about it, because at one point she and her mom and her little brother, the one who licked her stuff, they're walking down the street and a neighbor says, "And how are you today?" And she has to shout, "I have a hurt foot." And she's lying on the pavement just kind of moaning about it. And like sometimes you just want to do that, right? Like sometimes you want to just break through some of the societal conventions and be like, "I'm not okay right now." And this little girl does, and then realizes that she can have a better day tomorrow. And I think that there are lots of really great picture books. I know we have some lists at EPL about picture books to help kids talk about emotion and maybe talk about what they're feeling if they don't yet have the words for it. And there's lots of different books for parents and caregivers, or anyone who wants to get in touch with their emotions.
Sometimes us adults, we also don't sometimes have the words for our emotions as well. So good lessons to learn there anyway.
Yeah. Bryce, what's your overdue find this week?
Just like you too, I knew we were going to be talking today about a lot of movies and TV shows and everything. So I don't have a book that I'm going to be recommending, but I do actually. It's something that we don't talk about a lot, and that's music. Mostly because we kind of, Caroline, we joked around. I know I mostly have made fun of myself on this show based on my taste in music. And so I do, of course, have a recommendation today. It's interesting because, of course, we're talking about we're at the beginning of a new year. Of course, that means always at the end of the previous year, we get all these retrospectives where we hear about all the people, artists and actors and everybody else who unfortunately passed away the year before. One of the people who unfortunately passed away near the end of last year, of course, was legendary guitar player, musician, Eddie Van Halen. I was watching some stuff on him and I thought, you know what? I haven't really talked about the music of Van Halen on this show before. I have, of course, professed my love for classic rock, or AKA dad rock. And Van Halen is totally on that list. It's a band that I've always loved. And it's one of those bands too that if I had to we love talking about time travel, Caroline. If I could go back and witness, if I had to choose maybe 5 concerts to go to, I would totally want to go back sometime in the mid 80s and see Van Halen at their peak in some stadium show. I think it would be absolutely incredible. So I'm actually going to be recommending, you can stream it right now through Hoopla from us. It's called The Best of Both Worlds. It's the greatest hits album by Van Halen. If you're maybe one of our younger listeners or that you've never heard Van Halen before, you're in for a treat. I'm always a big fan of encouraging people to listen to greatest hits albums. If they haven't really heard kind of maybe the band before, it kind of gives you a really good taste of maybe why that band was so popular, kind of lets you dip your toe into some of their greatest hits. And this collection has pretty much all of them. So it's got Panama, Jump, Eruption, and of course Hot for Teacher. It's got, of course, Van Halen had a couple of different lead singers in David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. I'm personally more of a fan of the David Lee Roth years myself. Yeah, this is a great collection, and if you're looking for something, if you're starting to exercise more and looking for some music to kind of help you get through that, maybe music by Van Halen will totally get your blood pumping anyway. So I'm a big fan. And if you've never heard Van Halen before, not as familiar with their work, I can't recommend this album enough. So Caroline, I have to ask you, are you a Van Halen fan?
I, not like you, I would say. As you were listing off the songs, I was like, yeah, these are really great. And I think there would be a lot that I did recognize off the Greatest Hits album. But when you said that you were more of a fan of the David Lee Roth era, I don't know that I could differentiate yet. Maybe I'll have to do some independent research on that and get back to you.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's great music, and it's music too that we don't. I've talked about this before already. We don't get music like this anymore, and it took me back in my head to like those 80s years growing up and hitting arcades and spending my allowance there. So it's good music to listen to.
Today we are talking about the stuff that is not on Netflix, but that you can get through EPL. But before we jump into talking about all of that, you mentioned on our last episode, Bryce, that this was the topic of the very first Overdue Finds episode in 2018. What do you remember about recording that episode?
Yeah, it's funny because when you sent me over that question, I had to kind of think back a little bit. It's been, I think in April will be 3 years since we started doing this show. And it's funny because at the time, our previous co-host, Kim Bates, I was kind of put in charge of this whole podcast project. And my original thought was I would be more of a behind the scenes person. So I would be more of like, hey, I'm doing up these outlines. This is what we want to promote. And we basically, I'd met with Kim because I knew she was into podcasting and everything. And we were talking about setting up a few different kind of test recording episodes we were going to have a couple different librarians come in and do like a pilot episode, I guess. And so what was funny was we wanted to just go in and make sure we knew how to use the equipment first before we had other librarians, such as yourself, come in and like not waste their time. So we're like, well, why don't we just for fun, let's just record like this test episode and let's just think of a topic that, I think we had like maybe a day's notice and, we were like, let's just think of something easy to do. And not that it was easy to do at all, but we were like, let's talk about stuff that you can only borrow here that's not on Netflix. So that one was a lot different just because, the show hadn't we didn't have our Overdue Finds segments or anything, roundtable questions or anything like that. So it was just kind of more of a, let's see how this goes. Let's introduce the podcast and, let's just talk about some titles that we really like. And it in no way was probably ever meant to be the first episode, but it was. And it was just mostly because we'd recorded it and I thought it went really good and we edited it. And then I submitted it for some staff and some people from our leadership team to listen to. And they're like, wow, you guys have really good chemistry. This sounds really good. And in the meantime, we had recorded a couple other test episodes. One of those ones, of course, ended up being our second episode with Kate Gibson and Darren Hagen. And kind of based on just since they thought we did a good job and kind of it was going to be my project to work on anyway, they're kind of like, well, it probably makes sense that, you and Kim do this. So it was really exciting, obviously starting the podcast kind of from scratch. And I was really nervous because I didn't want to submit it and then it just sound terrible or have leadership going like, oh, that was cute. Like, okay, who else are we going to get to do this? So, and after we did it, we, had such a great time recording it. And I was like, let's just keep doing this. So yeah, and it ended up working good. But also too, like little stuff like the equipment that we used was a lot different than what we use today. Obviously, we were in person.
Yes.
We were using a different microphone different from what we normally use when we record in studio. So yeah, there was lots of hiccups along the way, but it was fun. And yeah, I'm glad we're able to explore this topic again. So
it was fun. I went back and listened to it. I had originally listened to it around the time when it came came out because it was very exciting that the library was going to have a podcast, and I wanted to hear what it was like. But I went back and listened to it in prepping for this episode because I didn't want to just say the same stuff again, and I don't think I will. But I both enjoyed listening to the episode as well as say much more scripted than our episodes are now.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so funny because, I did a little while ago through our How To Festival, I hosted a thing on starting your own podcast. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit in that presentation was kind of scripting what you're going to say on the show. And, I even admitted, like, those first few episodes, to be honest, I haven't gone back and listened. I probably should, but there's a part of me who kind of doesn't want to go back and listen because I know it was different. And, we were still nervous and there were certain things we wanted to hit on. So to me, I was way more comfortable at the time. Like, let's have some of this stuff, scripted out and we know what we're going to say. Whereas now, like, we send each other notes and there's the odd thing, that we do have right now, but for the most part, we're just kind of having a conversation, which is what a podcast should be anyway. So that's interesting. When you went back and listened to it, you're like, whoa, there's a lot of scripted stuff here.
Yeah, but it didn't sound stilted when I was listening. It didn't sound like you were reading, and that's why I was kind of surprised when I looked at in the file the original notes from the first episode how scripted it was, because it didn't come across like that to me when I was listening.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. I know I should probably go back and listen. I'm nervous to hear what I sound like.
I think it was good. It got a thumbs up from me.
Nice. So that's good. And you enjoyed it. I remember you talking to me afterwards and you were like, hey, if you ever need a guest, let me know. And I'm happy to come on.
Yeah. And I was. Yeah.
So there you go. 3 years later.
Yeah.
So let's start off today by talking about TV shows. Caroline, what TV show did you find that you can only get through us here at EPL that's not available on most of those major streaming services?
Yeah, as I was going through and doing some of my research for this episode, I feel a little bit nervous that I'm kind of opening up to like a fact checker on this, because I use Netflix as my main one. I checked usually to see if it was in Netflix, but there are so many more streaming services now than when you originally did this, even 3 years ago. And so I don't think that I'm willing to say for any of my picks that they are exclusively available through EPL, but they are most easily available through EPL. And my first one is Unsolved Mysteries. I know that I think it's through Amazon Prime maybe that it streams, but Hoopla has the seasons. We talked about it. We've got a whole episode. If you haven't watched Unsolved Mysteries in a long time or ever, go and check it out. You will not regret it.
Yeah, that was actually, we just recently released a blog of our top overdue finds from last year. And in there, we put like who the pick is from and what their favorite, or what episode they were on, or what, Caroline, for me, yourself, what our favorite episodes were. And Unsolved Mysteries was my favorite episode from last year. It was just really fun to go back and watch some of those old episodes, which really scared me as a kid. Like they were very creepy. And even there was still some stuff in there, even with the episode that I had watched where I talked about there was like a ghost in this house and everything. And there's no, that show traumatized a generation of kids. But it is interesting to go back and watch. When I go back and watch some of those, I love, hitting Google and finding out what happened or to some of these cases anyway. So it's a great pick.
Yeah, so Unsolved Mysteries. And then my other choice on here is something that we have as a DVD in our collection, which is American Crime Story, The People versus O.J. Simpson. I might have talked about this sometime in the past on the podcast. I've always intended to, because I love this miniseries that originally aired on FX in, I think, 2016. It's a several episode miniseries that looks at the O.J. Simpson trial from the mid-90s. The cast on it is amazing. Sarah Paulson, Sterling K. Brown, Courtney B. Vance, John Travolta is John Shapiro,
Robert
Shapiro, yeah, and David Schwimmer playing Robert Kardashian.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, the cast is amazing. Cuba Gooding Jr. is O.J. Simpson himself. The cast is amazing. The story is like unbelievable. The stuff that is you find out is true. The stuff that you didn't know at the time, like I remember watching and being aware of it and really thinking now about how media shaped my view of what was happening and my understanding of it. The exploration of race, particularly in like post Rodney King riots LA, and the difference between, all the conversations about where are they gonna have the trial because it would affect the jury. Just such an interesting thing. I highly recommend it. Just looking at it made me think that maybe I'm gonna dive back into it this weekend.
Yeah, it's a great miniseries. I remember watching it actually on FX when it originally aired. And yeah, definitely took me back because I was in just starting high school when that old trial was going on. And it just really kind of brought back those memories of how much it's hard to explain unless you really remember it actually happening in real life. But like, it was just everywhere. Like, it was dominating the news. Like, if you turned it to CNN, they would just have the whole trial going like all day. It was crazy. One of the parts in there, I shouldn't laugh at it because obviously it really kind of turned the trial, but like when they tried to introduce DNA,
yes,
and they're just like, jurors will be bored by this. Like, who cares about DNA? And, now it's just like, I'm sure if that had happened today, it would be an open and shut case, no problem. But, it's a great series.
We've talked, I forget exactly what the context was. I think it might have been with Camila, but past guest and member of the Overdue Finds family, around like the CSI-ification of forensics and how we went from like the O.J. Simpson trial, where basically they were saying like there is a 1 in like 6 billion chance that this is the person who and they're like, oh, but there's a chance that it's not, like that type of thing.
Yeah.
To now where it's, if there isn't that hardcore DNA forensic evidence, people are like, oh, I don't know if we can actually convict on it. I don't know if we can go forward without that drop of blood or sweat or saliva or whatever. So seeing that in the last 25 years has been a really interesting piece, as well as like, the depiction of Marcia Clark in the media and how all of the people in the trial became a story, how it overshadowed, particularly there were 2 people murdered in that. One of them was Nicole Brown Simpson, and the other was Ronald Goldman. And he and his family had to like fight to keep his name as part of the trial because it just became the Simpson trial. I just really enjoyed that miniseries. It won a bunch of Emmys, and we have it as a DVD in our collection.
Yeah, Sarah Paulson, by the way, as Marcia Clark is probably, to me, stands out. Like, there's tons of great actors in that, but Sarah Paulson is amazing in that series as Marcia Clark.
Yeah.
For me, I also have a DVD and a / Blu-ray. So this was my controversial pick for March Madness this past year, and that, of course, is the adult animated series Rick and Morty. So we actually have all 4 seasons on DVD. I think we have the first season on Blu-ray. And if you're not familiar with the show, Rick and Morty follows the adventures of scientist Rick Sanchez and his grandson Morty as they go on these elaborate adventures through space and other dimensions. Obviously, it's not a series for kids. I like it because the humor is quite dark. It's the animation style actually reminds me a lot of The Simpsons. Just everybody has really big eyes and everything. But the show's actually really smart as well, and kind of how it deals with topics like time travel or going to other dimensions, or just some of the family dynamics with Rick and his daughter, who of course is Morty's mother, and how he kind of abandoned them. So there's this kind of ongoing family plot line through it. So there is more to it than, I guess, the way it might look to you. If you see an ad for it on TV. Originally, it only airs on the Cartoon Network, so we don't really have past seasons that are streaming. But yeah, if you're looking for something different, and especially looking for something to make you laugh, Rick and Morty for me it's one of my favorite shows right now on TV. So definitely give it a chance.
Can you explain to me, and maybe to some of our listeners, what was the deal with the McDonald's sauce?
All right, so this is a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and make it as short as possible. So a few years ago, there was some very annoying Rick and Morty fans who went to McDonald's locations and demanded that they bring back Szechuan sauce for their chicken McNuggets. So there's an episode of Rick and Morty where Rick is going on this rant about just everything, and he's blowing up, and he's talking about how he wants McDonald's to bring back their Szechuan sauce, which they only had in like 98 when they were promoting the movie Mulan. Like he's like, bring it back, McDonald's. And it was like they ended the episode like that. And then after that episode aired, like all these Rick and Morty fans are going on Twitter demanding McDonald's bring back the Szechuan sauce. And my understanding is they did bring it back for some locations in the US only. And so yeah, it's kind of a weird story. It's one of those things where you have to watch the show to totally get it. But that's the other thing too that's kind of neat about the show. Like I said, they referenced a McDonald's promotional tie-in from the late 90s. And it was just, as somebody, Caroline, I know you're in the same boat. You're just kind of we're these pop culture geeks, and we love all these references. And that's also kind of one of the fun parts too about the show, is they'll bring up stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe I will have to check it out and see.
Yeah. One other show too, I also want to give a quick mention to as well, that you can also borrow on DVD through us, is the original Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High series. So, I mean, I'm kind of speechless about it, just because if you grew up in Canada during the 80s and 90s, there's a good chance you watched at least a few episodes of this show, or probably were traumatized by a few episodes. But that was some hardcore Canadian teen melodrama with the Degrassi series. Of course, we are talking about not the one with Drake in it, but like the original true 80s 90s series. So
the one with Joey Jeremiah, the Zit Remedy, Spike, Lucy, Wheels,
exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, if you're looking for a little bit of a nostalgia trip, go back and watch some of those episodes. In my opinion, I think they were really groundbreaking at the time. Like, a lot of people talk about My So-Called Life on TV, which was a groundbreaking teen show, but Degrassi really was the first one to do it, and it's Canadian.
Yeah, and I mean, they used real kids. That sounds silly to say, because other shows, it's not like they use robots, but they used like real Canadian kids. They didn't put a lot of makeup on them. They dressed them the way that kids were dressing, and just kind of put them out in front of the camera and told these stories about a lot of issues that not everyone was talking about. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Degrassi lately, we've got a number of episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to TV shows, there are also some movies that aren't on Netflix or easily streamable. What would you recommend that people check out?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of recommendations. I was going through our list of stuff that we have streaming and we have on DVD and everything. So I've got a little bit of mix of everything. So my first pick is actually through Hoopla, and it's actually a new movie that was one of the last movies in theaters before kind of the pandemic hit. Or no, sorry, it might have been one of the first movies to come back briefly. And that was, anyway, it's Unhinged, starring Russell Crowe. It's through Hoopla. It's like a brand new movie. Basically, Russell Crowe plays this, I'll just say it. He's kind of like a lunatic in this movie. Just really, he's a dangerous guy. And basically, this single mom is driving her kid to school one day, and they're stopped at a light, and Russell Crowe's zoned out. So she just, honks. Next thing you know, he is following her and just basically trying to ruin her life and everybody else who's in her life. This movie is not going to win any awards, Caroline, but you know what? This is a fun B thriller. So, and that isn't like, I'm not talking down to the movie. Like sometimes it's just nice to grab some popcorn, turn the brain off, and just be entertained. And this is one of those movies. It's pretty much go from right from the beginning. There's a lot of stuff you're going to be watching and being like, of course, this is like, it's like this for all thrillers where you're like, why are you doing that? Why are you going in there? What are you doing? You're going to be asking yourself that a lot while watching this movie. But at the end of the day, you're going to be entertained, and you're going to be like, you know what? I wouldn't have gone to the theater to watch that, but I'm glad I got to watch that at home for free.
Sometimes it's really satisfying to watch a movie that knows exactly what it is and does a great job at being that. Not every movie needs to be in Academy Award contention or have the tightest script or really go in deep on backstory. If it's, if it's more about pacing and jumping in and having that kind of emotional response to it, like you say, a movie can excel at being what it is.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And my other pick, you can actually borrow it on Canopy. You can stream it right away. Let's face it, we've all kind of, I think, had enough of stuff like the US election recently. But I noticed on there, speaking of elections, my other pick is the movie Election, starring Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon. So this movie came out, I believe it was the late 90s, just as Reese Witherspoon was getting like really big. And it's about a student council election in a high school. Matthew Broderick plays kind of the teacher who's overseeing this election, and Reese Witherspoon plays this student, which everybody kind of had one of these students in their when they went to school. She plays Tracy Flick. It's kind of the overachiever and, really kind of the teacher's pet. And she just kind of gets on the nerve of Matthew Broderick's character, and things just start to unravel. It's a really dark comedy. It's also one of those movies where I put it on and I'm laughing the whole time. Like it's just, it's an amazing show. And I know I can totally get why people don't want to kind of recently stay away from the election stuff. But this is something totally different, and give this a watch if you want to laugh, because it's really good. Have you seen the movie, Caroline?
I have. I remember when it came out, there were a lot of the reviews or a lot of the news stories about it were talking about Matthew Broderick kind of being back in a high school, because I would say I think it's fair to say that his most famous role would be Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
yeah.
He famously had a day off from high school, and this has him kind of back in, but as the adult this time. And so there's an element of playing with that idea that makes the movie kind of intriguing, but the performances are so good. Reese Witherspoon, this was really one of the first times that people were like, no, she's destined for big things here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny though, when you mentioned the Ferris Bueller thing too, like really Matthew Broderick is almost playing kind of like the principal in Ferris Bueller. He's basically, he knows that she's up to something or thinks that she is, and he just can't stand her, and he just wants to make her life a living hell. So it's a dark comedy, but it's really good.
Yeah, that single-minded focus that I think is played for laughs in Ferris Bueller. But when you step back and you think about like the extent to which the principal goes to track down the student, it gives you pause.
Yeah, absolutely. Caroline, how about you? What did you pick out?
I was a little bit nervous that you were going to take my pick, so I'm glad that you didn't. But my first one that I want to talk about is from Hoopla. It is the movie Straight Talk, starring Dolly Parton.
Sorry.
Have you seen this movie, Bryce?
We might own it here at my house on DVD, actually.
Okay. For those people who haven't seen it, I got so excited when I saw that it was on Hoopla because I hadn't seen it in over like decades, but I watched it. Yeah, I'll try to describe it, but it's really more of an experience. So in Straight Talk, Dolly Parton plays Shirley Kenyon, who she's a dance instructor, but she gets fired from that. She moves to Chicago. She kind of mistaken identities her way in to a job as a radio psychiatrist. And she confesses right away. She's like, that's not who I am, but she's just that gifted at giving people advice.
I mean, it's
And
Dolly Parton.
exactly.
So, yeah.
You're going to listen to her.
Mhm.
And the radio, like the mid-level executives are like, okay, we get it, but we're going to hire you anyway. Tell people that you're a doctor because for some reason it's incredibly important that they have like a doctor on the radio show giving the radio advice. So it's like, we're going to call you Dr. Shirley and you're going to be on this. So she's like, okay, I'm going to do this. She starts James Woods as this reporter who's trying to kind of unmask her. He knows something's fishy, but he's not really sure what. Meanwhile, she's really stressed out because there's like this lie that she's telling. It's also kind of a romance between her and James Woods, but there's the guy she left behind in their small town. It all comes to a head. It's just an enjoyable movie experience with an excellent theme song sung by Dolly Parton.
I'm glad you brought that up because I remember before I saw the movie, I remember seeing the video for it where it's like Dolly Parton singing Straight Talk. And there's a part where she's like, straight talk, and pass the sugar, please.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Dolly Parton has not been in a ton of movies, but the ones she's done have really made an impression. When you think of like 9 to 5, Steel Magnolias, Straight Talk.
She's so likable and just kind of proves like, yeah, she doesn't need to be in a ton of movies. I wish she was in more, but yeah, she's just she's an incredible presence and such an awesome personality. And yeah, you cannot listen to Dolly Parton talk and not smile. But Dolly Parton in real life could totally give me life advice, and I would follow her direction for sure.
Yeah, so it makes total sense. The casting checks out for why she's so successful as a radio personality. So yeah, check out Straight Talk on Hoopla. Mm-hmm. I also had a couple other ones. I really love Canopy because it has a bunch of older movies. I was going to say earlier this year, but it was actually last year. I can say that now, that it was 2020. And I invented a different kind of challenges for me with movie watching. I think I may have mentioned this on the podcast because I tend to get overwhelmed by choice and there are just so many great titles on these things. So one was I picked a movie for every letter of the alphabet. After that, I challenged myself to watch a movie for every year from 1920 to 2020. And Canopy really came through on a lot of the older movies, the silent movies, and then into the 1950s and 60s. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend Charade, starring Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant, and Walter Matthau. It's on both Canopy and Hoopla, so you've got a little bit of choice there. Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant meet in the Alps, and there's a bit of spark there. Audrey Hepburn goes home and discovers that her husband has been murdered, and a bunch of men think that she knows where a hidden fortune is, so they're trying to outrun these guys. Cary Grant is hiding something. Audrey Hepburn's hiding something. Walter Matthau is all gruff. It's just really, the performances are great. The scenery's great. Check out Charade if you haven't seen it.
Is that an Alfred Hitchcock movie?
I'm trying to remember if I remember seeing Alfred Hitchcock in it. Stanley Donen.
Okay.
So it was directed by Stanley Donen, who also did Singing in the Rain, is another very famous one of his.
Two totally different movies there.
Yeah.
Walter Matthau, by the way, he's one of those great actor, and it's one of those people too where I have a feeling like you talked about him being so gruff. I have a feeling like he always kind of looked like an old man, even as like a kid, probably. Like he just kind of has that, like he has a great face, like he's such a great actor anyway. So it's Charade's one of those movies I've seen a list on that, Hoopla and Canopy before, and I know of it. I've never watched it, but that sounds like a really good movie though.
Yeah, if you're in the mood for a thriller, maybe a little, I don't know that it would have the adrenaline of Unhinged, but that could be an interesting double feature.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Canopy and Hoopla, both have some great documentaries. Caroline, we've even talked about in the past about doing an episode of the podcast on documentaries, and I think we definitely will do that one day. But which documentaries on either or both of those services stand out for you?
I'm referring back, I guess I've talked about this in the past as well. Design Canada and Helvetica are on Canopy, and those are both kind of marketing, graphic design documentaries that look at things like typeface and symbols and how, Canadian identity in the mid-60s really developed. That's in Design Canada. Helvetica looks at the ubiquity of the Helvetica font. I really enjoyed both of those, but I've talked about them in the past. So I switched over to Hoopla and found the documentary It Started as a Joke, which is a documentary that came out early last year, and it's about the Eugene Merman Comedy Festival. Eugene Merman is the voice of Gene on Bob's Burgers, and very funny comedian who has a few specials out and lots of work that you can find him in. He was part of the alternative comedy scene of the mid 2000s, primarily in New York and on the East Coast. And he and his friends were joking about, maybe starting their own comedy festival, and then they went and did it, or he went and did it. And it was basically just him programming his friends and what he wanted to kind of see, and anything goes. It lasted for 10 years. And this is a documentary about the final Eugene Merman Comedy Festival. The documentary kind of morphs into something else as it goes along, because he and his wife were facing his wife's very serious cancer diagnosis. And it then kind of becomes about their life and how life impacts comedy and comedy impacts life. And they end up very in a different place than they thought they were headed for. But it's a really great documentary about that comedy scene, about Eugene Merman as a person, and I really recommend it.
Sounds like a great pick. I was not aware of that movie at all. I love Bob's Burgers, as I've talked about on the show before, and I'm actually a sucker for documentaries about stand-up comedians. I absolutely love those type of documentaries, so I'm absolutely going to check that out. One of the things I find really funny about Eugene is that if you look at Gene Belcher, the character he voices in Bob's Burgers, like Eugene looks like a grown-up version of. I'd be very curious to see if, when he came in to read, did they kind of maybe draw the character to make him look a little bit more like him? But yeah, I don't know if they talk about that at all in the documentary. But
no, but I would watch that documentary too if it existed.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah. And then another one I know I've plugged on the show before is also on Hoopla, Three Identical Strangers, about long-lost triplets who were adopted out separately. They find each other as adults when they're in their 20s and quickly realize that there is more to this adoption story than they first thought. It's a wild, wild ride. Three Identical Strangers, recommend that documentary.
Which service is that on?
That one's on Hoopla.
Okay, nice. That sounds really good.
Yeah. How about you? What are you recommending for documentaries?
Well, I talked about this one. I think it was on our last episode. I'm just going to give it another really quick plug. It's on Hoopla. It's called Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy, the Ren and Stimpy story. On the last episode, I talked about I was a fan of the show as a kid, and it does a really good job of taking you behind the scenes and some of the controversies around that show, and especially its creator. So go check that one out. You don't have to be a Ren and Stimpy fan to enjoy it. One of the ones too that I'm a big fan of it. I saw it recently, and it is on both Hoopla and Canopy, and it's called Being Evil, and it takes a look at the complex life of famous Daredevil from the 70s, Evel Knievel. So it takes a look at his entire life, from how he started out to kind of his fame, kind of reached kind of the peak of his fame in the 70s. He kind of became this big pop culture icon. It's crazy to think about though, like today, like Evel Knievel back in the day, like, you know, he jumps the fountain at Caesar's Palace, and of course he bites it. But it's interesting because like that was on like ABC Wide World of Sports, which was such a huge show. Like it would be on Saturday afternoons, and like anything big in the sports world would air on ABC's Wide World of Sports. So it was like you'd have this huge captivated audience. This is like pre-internet and all of that stuff. So I mean, you know, if somebody wanted to do that today, like, yeah, you would probably see a clip on Twitter and you would forget about it, you know, a day later. But Evel Knievel was just this huge pop culture icon. And to this day, people still celebrate his life. He, of course, he was not, you know, kind of behind the scenes. He wasn't necessarily the greatest person. He went through a few different marriages and didn't handle maybe his finances the best way. And unfortunately really hurt himself really bad and kind of really screwed up his body. But it's just, that's the type of stuff I totally eat up. I love those types of stories about, you know, these pop culture icons, and, you know, especially from the 70s and 80s. And Being Evil is a great documentary to watch. And Matthew McConaughey is in it, you know, talking with Evel Knievel and how big of an influence he was on him as well. So yeah, it's a great documentary. Were you an Evel Knievel fan, Caroline?
I have a cultural awareness of him, and that's about as far as it goes. So I think I could really learn a lot from a documentary like that.
I think you'd like it. It's a good time.
Before we get to our roundtable questions, Bryce, can you let our listeners know what is coming up on our next episode, which will be released on Friday, January 29th?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the show, we talked about how we're hosting our first forward-thinking speaker series event in a year with Urshad Manji. Well, on the next episode of Overdue Finds, we'll be talking with Urshad about not only her event with us, but also about her book called Don't Label Me, and what it means to have moral courage in 2021. Caroline, I'm about halfway through Urshad's book right now, and she definitely brings up a lot of really interesting themes around moral courage, and especially about, you know, being able to speak your mind, and how, especially today, you know, it's okay to have different opinions than other people, and sometimes it does take courage to have those different opinions. So we're going to be chatting with her all about that, and yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with her.
Yeah, I think it'll be a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So for our first roundtable question today, if you could create a specialty streaming service specifically for you, what would it include?
So Bryce TV. Now, I wasn't sure about this question because, or are you talking about like specific titles that would be on there, or what type of content?
Just general content. I was thinking a lot about this. In my life, I've spent a fair amount of time. If I had a TV channel, how would I program it? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I've since realized, well, if I had a whole streaming service, it wouldn't just be one content piece. So yeah, I was curious to know what media you would like to bring together for Bryce TV.
Well, we're going to have a mix of things. We're going to have, of course, we're going to have NHL hockey will be on there. We are also going to have some true crime documentaries. That'll be a big one. And a show that I haven't talked much about on this show, just because we really don't have it in our collection. We're going to have some King of the Hill reruns on there as well. So it's going to be a wide range of, you're going to have sports, some cartoons, and some true crime. So I wouldn't be turning off Bryce TV anytime soon.
Yeah, I think I would subscribe. I would at least get the free trial.
Yeah, you'd watch it for like 2 weeks, and then you'd be like, I don't know, this $5 a month seems maybe a little much for this.
Yeah, I don't know. This like Caroline TV, it's very niche. I will say that. It has episodes of soap operas from the 80s and 90s specifically. It has on-demand figure skating competitions, and it has a couple shows dedicated to pop-up videos, because I miss the classic pop-up video, and I learned a lot of information from watching those pop-ups with the information. So I think I would like to bring that back. Then I realized I was maybe getting into like producing and like creating original content for this, and that really wasn't the intent of the question, but I think there's enough there for you to get a window into who I am.
I have to quickly say the whole pop-up video thing. I totally miss pop-up videos, by the way. I remember, I think it was a few years ago, AMC would occasionally air like pop-up versions of movies. So like I remember watching one where it was like the pop-up version of 16 Candles. And it's so fun to watch, especially for movies like that you've seen like 100 times. And it points out little stuff that you may not have ever caught before. So if any other networks or streaming services are listening to this, let Caroline and I do some programming for you, and we will come up with some great pop-up ideas for movies.
Yeah, we know you'll have 2 viewers at least.
Exactly. It's totally worth the investment, by the way.
If you could turn any TV show into a movie, which one would you pick?
I really struggled with this one, but the one thing I kept coming back to was I really enjoyed I think it was the mid-90s when the Brady Bunch movie came out. They were, of course, around then they started to really kind of release all these old classic TV series as movies. And the one that we never saw, and that I think you could have fun with if you kind of played it tongue-in-cheek like the Brady Bunch movie, is Gilligan's Island. Like, I think you can have some fun with that show. Totally, kind of make fun of like, wait a second, we can't build a boat, but we can build a radio out of this coconut. So I think there's lots of stuff there that you can do. I don't know who you're going to cast in it at all, but a movie version of Gilligan's Island, I'm lining up to see it.
Speaking of lining up, Bryce, you and I have lined up. Gilligan's Island is my answer. I'm going in a direction. Okay, we did not talk about this. Out of all TV shows in all the world, and we both choose Gilligan's Island, I'm going in a different direction with it, though. I'm going as like thriller. Like they land on this island. Something is there. Maybe something's hunting them. Gilligan is the first one to discover it, and nobody finds him, like believes him. Very modern update. So like no one has really good survival skills. I think like Gilligan's Island, but dark was my pitch. So I think there's room for both of these.
There's both. Absolutely. Like this can maybe be like a Deep Impact Armageddon type situation where maybe these 2 movies are like released within a couple of months of each other, and the public has 2 great Gilligan's Island options to choose from.
I mean, so just funny. Imagine the future where you've got your choice of Gilligan's Island. I think.
Yeah. Do we want to watch serious Gilligan's Island or tongue-in-cheek Gilligan's Island? Yeah. Both are great options.
No, I love this. This is one of my favorite moments of the podcast now.
Absolutely.
So we hope you've enjoyed today's episodes. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show so that you get all of our new episodes. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
And don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. We obviously talked about a lot of movies and TV shows. So click on that show notes link and you'll get access to all the links to them. We would love to hear from our listeners, of course. So if there's a certain topic that you would like us to cover in our next episode, or someone that you'd love to hear us talk to, you can reach us on Twitter at epl.ca or email us at podcast@epl.ca. And don't forget that you can share your thoughts about the show with us on Twitter by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.